everyone, Praetorian here. I was wondering what kind of YouTube video should I make. And then I decided, why make an actual video when I can just, I don't know, make a tier list. That's way easier, wow. So, what we're doing now is we're gonna be making a tier list of the greatest RTS games ever made. Well, at least the ones I've played. So yeah, I love RTS games, which means that most of those are gonna be pretty high tier. But let's see. And we're gonna start with the first one, which is Dune 2, which in my, from what I know, is the first RTS game ever made. And well, it's alright, it hasn't aged very well. It's basically like Command and Conquer, but with really bad controls. You have to actually press M on your keyboard. If you want to move, you can just right click and things like that. And I believe you can only select one unit at a time. So yeah, it's alright, but I don't know. I didn't really play it back in the day, because that game is way too old, even for me. So I'll just put it in the middle. It's alright, but it hasn't aged well. And there are games in the Command & Conquer series which do the same thing but better. And next we have Warcraft 1, Orcs and Humans. Now that is the first RTS game I've actually seen. As I said, Dune 2 I didn't really play back in the day. But this one I did play, and it's pretty good. It's also a bit clunky like Dune. You have the bad controls. You can't just right click to move. You have to like press on your keyboard. You can select multiple units, but you have to hold control while dragging your mouse. And you can only select like 4 at a time. And yeah, there is online multiplayer though, which I believe didn't exist in Dune. So this is the first game you can actually play 1v1, which is pretty cool. Honestly, I really like this game. I kind of want to put it in A, but it definitely hasn't aged the best. So I'm not sure. What the hell? I'll put it in A. You know, if this is the Wolfenstein 3D of RTS games, this is like the Doom of RTS games in my opinion. It paved the way for everything else. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty fun to play. Even nowadays, if you get past the terrible controls. And next we have Warcraft 2, which is basically like Warcraft 1, except it's actually a lot more playable. And yeah, it's a bit more fun. And the controls are better. It's not that much different. Like you still collect gold and lumber. You build things, then you build units. But the maps are no longer random, they're a bit more balanced, and yeah, as I said, the controls are better. Is that enough to put it in S tier? Well, honestly, maybe. Because this is the game that everyone was copying back in the day. This was like a very good base for RTS games. And honestly, I think someone should make a game similar to this nowadays. I don't know why people don't. There are basically no RTS games nowadays, but you can take something simple like Warcraft 2, where it's just, you have a grid, every unit takes one square on the grid, kind of like a chess piece, and then you just collect resources and build structures. And you can make the factions more interesting, because in Warcraft 2 they're basically the same. And I think that would be a pretty fun game. You don't really need to make some weird gimmicks in RTS games, because RTS games are really complicated. So you could just have a very basic experience like Warcraft 2. And I think it would be pretty good. Now, of course, you'd have to fix the factions, because even though they're the same, they have different abilities, and their abilities are kind of imbalanced. Like in Warcraft 2 you have the Ogre Magi, which has Bloodlust, which is way stronger than Heal, like triples your damage. It's ridiculous. But yeah, it's a pretty fun game. I play it a lot. And there are still some people that play it even nowadays. There's a Russian server, I think. I don't know. There's the Battle.net edition too. So yeah, it hasn't aged terribly. And then we have Warcraft 3, which goes here. This tier is reserved for the really best of the best. The games which will always be relevant, pretty much. This is one of them. It was not only the first game that combined RPG with RTS in such a good way, where you have heroes that level up and get items, but also it had one of the best map editors I've seen, and that spawned a lot of custom maps. It even spawned things like Dota, Tower Defense, which became their own separate games. Like, this game is just so good. Like, it's so rich. There's so many neutral units in general, items, abilities. You can just make whatever you want in the map editor. And the campaign is great. The multiplayer is great. Everything is just great. Well, except the remake, which they released, which is actually inferior to the original. I'm not sure how they pulled that off, but they did. So yeah, the only RTS games released nowadays are basically remakes of old games, which are actually good. No one has come up with anything original, unfortunately. And the next game which goes in this tier is Starcraft Brood War. Oh, by the way, I'm skipping the expansions. I'm not gonna have them separate because it's gonna take way too much time. So I'm considering the base game and all the expansions. So yeah, Starcraft Brood War, it spawned esports basically. It's still played in Korea. It's really popular. It's really crazy. Like, the players have gotten so much better since back in the days. I still watch Korean tournaments from time to time, and it's very entertaining. So this game is not quite as moddable as Warcraft 3. Well, there aren't really mods, but the map editor is not as powerful. But the 1v1 gameplay is probably the best in any RTS game. It's very deep, and it's probably gonna be played forever. I don't know. The Koreans like it so much. And there's a Western scene too. It's not just Korea. So yeah, those are probably the only two games that will go there, but we'll see. I do think those are just a step above the rest. Next we have Starcraft 2. Now this game, I don't like it as much as Starcraft 1. So I'll probably put it either here or here. So what's my issue with Starcraft 2? Well, it tried to recreate Starcraft, except Starcraft's already perfect, so they had to change something. But they didn't change the right things. They had a new 3D engine, which is okay. I mean, Warcraft 2 was also 3D and that was fine. But what Starcraft did was it improved the unit pathfinding and unit selection to the point where you can select basically infinite units and they all bunch up together. And I really don't like that. I like when the units are chunky and take up a lot of space, like in Warcraft 2 or Starcraft. Even in Warcraft 3, they're pretty big, but there it doesn't really matter that much because you don't have that much units. But in Starcraft 2 what happens is you have a million units and they all stack together, and unless you have AoE, they just demolish everything. Like, you can have 100 Marines and just box them together, and they melt Zealots. That's not really the case in the original, because then you can't really control 100 Marines very well. You have to split them in different control groups, and they take multiple screens. They just can't walk together very well. So it's difficult to engage with all of them. And that's a theme that I'll be complaining about in all of these RTS games. It all comes down to this. There's this thing called the Lanchester's laws, which is basically mathematical equations to calculate how many units will die from an engagement. which was made for trench warfare, I believe, but it's also useful for strategy games. And the way it works is there's one that's called the linear wall, which means, say you have 10 spearmen against 20 spearmen, and they're in lines of 10. So you would have 10 guys fighting against 10 guys, and then 10 guys sitting in the back. And if they're of equal strength, like in a video game, they would just die. They would trade. So you would have 10 dying from both sides. And then the guy that had 20 would have 10 surviving. And, you know, that's a benefit for having more units. But then you also have something else, which is called the square wall, which would be, say you have 20 archers against 10 archers, and all of them are shooting at each other at the same time. And the 20 archers, they're not only twice as many, but they also kill their opponents twice as fast, because they're shooting more arrows. So you have a situation where just having slightly more units gives you an insane snowball, so you take very few losses. And that's what happens in all these games, where you can just stack a bunch of units together, and if you have more units, you just win very hard. And that's what I think happens in Starcraft 2, unless you have some AoE damage, or they also make these ridiculous tiny ramps. Like every map has a ramp to your base, it's really tiny, so you can block it with buildings, otherwise you're just gonna die. And yeah, you also have ramps in Brood War, but like if you play one of those old maps where it's open terrain, like a free-for-all or something, it's still playable. Like you can still play the game. You're not gonna die immediately because you can't block off your base and your opponent can just make a million units. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the small unit collision where you can just stack a million units together. I think it's a lot more strategic where you have a few units on the screen and you can't bunch them together very effectively. So it's like more like in real life where logistics is difficult, so you have to take key positions and fight there instead of just boxing your whole army and just press attack. They roll over everything if they're more. So yeah, that's my main concern with StarCraft 2 really. Also, they have the map pattern like in Warcraft, but the game feels a lot more barren in comparison to Warcraft 3, because this is like a fantasy game with tons of abilities and units, and this is like, yeah, you have the 3 factions like in Brood War, but it's about it. There aren't that many neutral buildings, and there are no items. And yeah, I don't know, it's just not as fun as Brood War to me. It's still a good game, it's still played today, but I did get bored of it somewhat. I played it a lot back in the day, and now I don't really want to play it anymore. And they did change it a lot. They keep changing some things, and it's still kind of meh. So I don't know. It's still an okay game. I guess it should be in S tier, because it's... yeah. One thing I want to note though is the expansions. I didn't really like the story mode. The original was probably the best, Wings of Liberty. But yeah, let's move on. So next we have the original Command & Conquer. This one is a pretty good game. It's kind of like a different take on the Warcraft formula. Instead of having every structure build unit separately, you have like a separate menu where you can just build units and they automatically get produced from whichever structure. And if you make more structures, they just get produced faster, I believe, like twice as fast or something. And you also make harvesters, which collects ore from like the middle of the map or something, which is a bit different from the gold mines and lumber, which makes it so map control is more important. And yeah, it's an interesting game. I think I like it slightly less than Warcraft 2 though, so I would put it here. Then we have Command & Conquer Redwater. This is basically the same as Command & Conquer, but a bit more interesting. I really like the Redwater series, they're really wacky, the story is insane, and Dune is really fun. Is that enough to push it in S tier? I don't think so. It's basically the same game as this. It's not that much different. Then we have Dune 2000. This is also pretty similar to the previous Command & Conquer games. It doesn't really stand out, in my opinion. So I'll just keep it here. Still fun to play. Then we have Tiberium Sun. This one is a bit better than these, but I don't know if I really want to put it up here. It's still not really one of my favorite Command & Conquer games. It's definitely more interesting than the previous ones though. But it still plays about the same. So yeah, I'll just put it here. Alright, now this is a good one. Now I have Redwater 2. This one goes here. This is the best Command & Conquer game, period. It is just so fun to play. The units are crazy, the story is wacky. Everything is just so fun. The only real issue with this game is that it's unbalanced, completely unbalanced. So yeah, like you have this faction Yuri which just mind controls units, and they have some really insane units, really. Then you have Russian tanks which are straight up better than American tanks, and this game is all about making tanks and denying your opponent's harvesters. But yeah, it's even that being said, it's still fun. There's still people playing it online, I believe. There's an online community for it. And the campaign is just awesome. The cutscenes are awesome. Everything about it is awesome. But it's just slightly worse than these two, because, you know, there's no map editor. There's not as much modding support because of that. The competitive scene isn't really as good as these two games. These two probably have the best competitive scene. And maybe Starcraft too. But I'm not as big of a fan of that game. So yeah, I'll just put it here. I do like it more than these, to be honest. If I had to rank them, I guess I should put this here. Something like that. Not sure about these. Alright, next we have Emperor. This is another Command & Conquer game. It's the first 3D one, I believe. It's basically like Dune 2000, but in 3D. It's a lot more interesting. But I don't know, I don't think it's as good as Redwater 2. It's probably like upper A tier, more S tier. It is very fun to play, but it's kind of janky, and I don't think it's played nowadays. I'm not sure if it aged that well. Alright, next up we have Generals. This is the closest to Redwater 2. It's really good. It's a very fun game. It's like, it's another 3D game, and transitioned really well into 3D. Not sure how they did it. It feels like, I don't know, it's like a mix of Redwater with some modern story and tactics. Like you have USA, China, and the terrorists. And it's just as wacky as Redwater, and the units are really fun. And I also think there's also a scene for that game, even today. A pretty small scene, but yeah, still, people play it. It's just very fun. Definitely one of my favorite Command & Conquer games. Then we have Command & Conquer 3, which is it's after Generals. I don't like it as much as Generals. I don't remember it as much. I did enjoy it back in the day, but it's not as memorable, so I'll just put it around here, around the Emperor, I guess. Next up is Redwater 3, which is almost as good as Redwater 2. A lot of people don't like it, but I think they did a pretty good job. It's just that Redwater 2 is a really good game. It's kind of difficult to top it off. They did try to transition into 3D, which was okay. I will put it in S tier. It's not really played nowadays, to my knowledge. Didn't have a competitive scene. I imagine it's probably not very well balanced, but it is really fun to play. So yeah, I do like the mode. Next up, Age of Empires. Age of Empires 1 is actually my favorite Age of Empires 1 game, which might be a bit controversial. But I just really like the time period. And it makes sense in my opinion, because you start in the Stone Age and then you have basically nothing. And then you go up into 2Age and then you have farms and you have horses and you have actual weapons. Then in Bronze Age you have actual warfare with siege weapons and things like that. It just makes a lot of sense. You have really cool factions, and it also has like the big chunky units, which I like, with big unit collision. The pathfinding is a bit broken, but yeah, it's still okay. I don't like this game. The only issue with it is that it's not great for competitive play, because it's not very easy to defend. It's not like in Age of Empires 2, where you can just go into your town hall with your villagers and you can defend them. So offense is a lot stronger here, which makes a lot of the high level games end very quickly in rushes. But other than that, I really like this one. I think it's my favorite Age of Empires game. Then we have Age of Empires 2, which probably had the best remastered game released recently, the Definitive Edition, which definitely modernized it quite a bit. So it is actually played a lot nowadays. This is a game we could potentially put in SS tier, but I still think it's a bit worse than those. And as I said, I don't really like the time period of this one as much, and I don't like how the units go in formations and they just stack on top of each other really well. But other than that, everything works really well. The UI is great. They did a good job with the remaster, and the game is still played today. So yeah, it's a really good game. Personally, I like this one more. Age of Empires 3 though, this one I didn't really get into. Didn't really like it. It's in 3D and it has some weird gimmicks. I definitely think it's the weakest Age of Empires game. Is it B tier or is it A tier? I don't know. I really don't like it. I'll probably just put it here. Might be higher than that, but I personally don't like it. I haven't played it much. And when I did play it, I don't remember much. I just remember it was basically the Age of Discovery, and you had to pick some weird cards, or what was it? I don't know. It's not very good in my opinion. It's still fun to play, but just a couple of times. It gets boring fast in my opinion. Then we have Age of Mythology. Now this one did a really good job of transitioning the Age of Empires formula into 3D. It is a great game in my opinion. And I'm actually surprised that more people don't play it nowadays, because it's just such a fun game. It has very cool, unique things where you have you choose different gods, so you get to choose kind of your tech path. Then the different gods have different abilities that you can use, and some of them are once per game, and they can really change the flow of the game. I don't know, it's just a really cool game. And you have mythical units. I really don't know what the issue with this game is. It's really great, but it's not really played that much nowadays, to my knowledge. There's definitely a scene for it, but it's not as big as Age of Empires 2, for example. I personally like it more than Age of Empires 2, I guess, but it doesn't really have the same competitive scene. So I don't know. It's a great game, either way. Then we have Stronghold and Stronghold Crusader. Those are really cool games. They basically combine city building with RTS. You make your castle, you collect resources, and use those resources to train units. It's really fun. It's a great game. Not that fun to play competitively, I imagine. I don't think it's played much nowadays. but it is still a very fun game. So I probably want to put it here in S tier. You know, it's just a blast to play. You can make a ton of units. You can make crazy castles, and you can defend them. It's really fun to play, even online. Stronghold 2 though, unfortunately, that one did not transition very well into 3D. I barely don't remember anything from this game, which means it's probably not very good. I don't think it's the worst game, so I'll just put it here, I guess. But yeah, not great. I think there's also Stronghold 3, but I've never played that one. Alright, next up, Age of Empires. Empire, sorry. Empire is like Age of Empires, but instead of taking to 4 ages, you take to like 1,000,000. And it's definitely not as competitive in terms of online play. But it is very fun to play nonetheless. I think it's a solid 8-tier game. It's very interesting. You should at least play it a couple of times. It's very original. You have, I think it was 12 different ages. You start from the Stone Age and you go up all the way to some weird digital age, whatever it's called. Some sci-fi shit. And it's in 3D. The graphics are kind of primitive, but it still looks fine if you zoom out. And I think it's still fun to play. It holds up pretty decently even nowadays. Empire 2, it changed a bit. Tried to make some weird changes, like a second camera that you can look at different locations. And it was supposed to be like really cool and useful in online games or something. But I don't know, it didn't really do much. I like it less than Empire 1. Not much to say about that one. Let's just put it here. It's not awful, but it's not as good as this one in my opinion. Speaking of awful though, this one is probably the only game here. This is just bad. It's worse than Empire 2, and there are also tons of technical issues with this game. If you can even get it to run, it's not very stable. The sound is awful, the graphics are awful, the gameplay is awful, everything's just awful. I don't know what happened with this game. I haven't actually played it a lot. I think I played it like a bit and immediately uninstalled it. But I've seen videos of it and it is bad. So you don't need to play this one. We have Warwind. This is a really jank old game. It's like a Warcraft 2 clone. But it has a lot worse UI than Warcraft 2. In Warcraft 2 UI, it's not even that advanced. Like, if you're making a Warcraft 2 clone, at least have better UI, at least as good UI as Warcraft 2. It's really... You can get it free on GOG, but it's kind of outdated. It doesn't play very well. Warcraft 2 still plays fine nowadays, this one not so much. It has some original things where you can transform your peasants into units, which is probably the first game where I've seen this. But I don't know, it's not great. It's kind of janky. Right, next up we have Blitzkrieg. This is a World War II RTS. It doesn't have any base building. You just have missions, and you're given units and reinforcements, and you have to kill everyone with it. It's pretty interesting. I like World War II games, so I did like it a lot, but it's probably not as great as I would rank it. So maybe like high B tier or something. No, I guess I'll put it in A. This is my list. Screw it. I did like this game. I played it a lot. Blitzkrieg 2, pretty much the same thing. It's a bit different, but the idea is the same. And it was about as interesting. So we'll just put it there. Then we have Tsar. This is the first Bulgarian RTS, I believe. So I gotta give it some bonus points for that. I do like this game actually. It's pretty simple. It's like a similar playstyle to Warcraft 2. But it's a bit more organized. You have like 3 different factions. and they actually have differences. You have the Europeans, the Arabs, and the Asians, and it's like a mix of medieval things and fantasy. You even have items your units can level up. That's pretty original. I think it was kind of new back in the day. It's definitely not the greatest in terms of you know, visuals and sound design. I don't think the units even have voice lines, but I do like playing it. It's pretty fun. Maybe not an S tier game. I personally really like it, but probably just an A tier game. So we just put it here. Pretty fun. Then we have Celtic Kings. The original for this game I didn't really enjoy. It was like a B probably. Like, it had some interesting ideas. You have instead of collecting minerals on the map with peasants, you have a base. It starts with buildings and you just build units from there. And you have heroes and you go around the map, and the maps are randomly generated, so you collect items and you capture structures, and your heroes level up and your units level up, and you attach your units to your heroes. And yeah, it's pretty interesting, but you only have like the Gauls and the Romans, and the heroes level up, but they don't have skills like in Warcraft 3, for example. So it felt a bit bland. It didn't have enough substance. But then it had 2 expansions, which are like kind of expansions, kind of separate games. And it's kind of weird because I believe they were only released in Spain and they have different names. It's called like Imperium. And the latest one is called Imperium 3, Greatest Battle of Rome or something. I don't even know what the game is called. And it's not available for purchase as far as I know, which is a shame because it's a really great game. It pushes it to A tier. It makes it a lot more interesting. It adds a ton of factions. It adds a ton of objects on the map, and the heroes now actually gain skills, so you can level them up and level up different abilities. And yeah, it's a lot more fun because of that. It actually makes the game fun, and it's no longer boring. There's a lot more content, and I believe they're actually making an HD remake for that game. There's a fringe player base for this game still, so hopefully the HD remake is actually playable for everyone, and hopefully it's available on Steam soon. So yeah, it's a really fun game. With the HD remake, if they do it well, it might even go up here. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Then we have Knights of Honor. It's another Bulgarian game. Celtic Kings is as well. It's from the same guys that made Tsar. This one, it's basically like medieval Total War, but it's a lot faster and a lot more arcadey, which I do like. I do like fast-paced RTS games. So yeah, this one is really fun to play, but it's mostly just a single-player experience. You just conquer the map a couple of times, and that's about it. But it is fun to play nonetheless. I believe there's a second installment of this game coming out, a sequel pretty soon, so I'm looking forward to that. Then we have Total Annihilation. A lot of people like this game, but I never really got into it. I believe it was released around Starcraft. It was competing with Starcraft, and I don't think it's as good as Starcraft. It's probably like an A tier, but I never really got into it, so I'll just put it here. Next we have Kozaks. Now this is a really fun game. I really like it. It's a new take on the RTS genre. So usually you have you collect resources, then you build a bunch of structures, and you make a ton of units. But what if you couldn't make more structures if you had more resources? And it's not like you don't have base building. You do, but all the buildings scale insanely. So for example, if your first barracks costs 100 resources, the second one costs like 10,000 or something. So you're gonna be producing from only a couple of structures, and what happens is that you're producing basically infinite units. You just click produce infinity, and they just constantly produce. So you focus on your units instead of resource collection, I guess. And the cool thing about this game was it's fairly old, but even back in the day you had these giant armies. You can make like 2,000 units and walk them around the map. And it's pretty cool. And I do like the new mechanic, the new take on the RTS, where you have scaling cost of structures. But the issue with this game is because you have so many units, the collision is non-existent. So the units just stack on top of each other. It makes the battles a bit less interesting. Like, the best strategy is to just make the unit that gets produced the fastest, because then you just have the most units, and you just throw over your opponent. But nonetheless, I really enjoy the game. I still play it from time to time. It's really fun. Next up we have Kozaks 2, which is it's a different take on that game. And I think it's less interesting. It has some interesting ideas, like they try to rely more on your informations, and you wait for them to get in position and you shoot. It's like a Napoleonic warfare. The first game is as well. So yeah, this one is like more historically accurate, I guess, but it's less fun to play, so I'll just put it in B tier. I have Kozaks 3, which I haven't actually played, but I want to play. I'll give it some time, I guess. From what I've seen, it's pretty much the same as Kozaks 1, but it's in 3D. It's a bit modernized, but it plays pretty much the same. So it goes here as well. Next up we have American Conquest. This is basically Cossacks, but instead of Napoleonic warfare you have Native Americans and, you know, that kind of thing. And the Europeans. It's pretty fun, but it's very unbalanced, because you're trying to balance the Native Americans with the Europeans. And one of them have cannons and gunpowder and formations, and the other have like guys with sticks and blowpipes and arrows. And that's just completely imbalanced. They try to kind of balance it, but it's just a mess. I don't know if this game is actually playable online, but it is fun to play, single player at least. And this one, it's Heroes of Annihilated Empires. It's basically from the same guys that made Cossacks, and it's like Cossacks but a fantasy game. It's pretty fun to play. Probably not a lot of people have heard of it, but I think it's a cool game. Next up we have Ground Control. This one, I remember it being pretty interesting. It had some original ideas. I think it was one of the first games that had the idea where you actually don't fight for resources, but instead you fight for key locations, and you get resources from just holding locations. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. I guess it goes in A tier. Next up, Sudden Strike. This is another World War II game, similar to Blitzkrieg. I really like this. I played this game a lot. I'm gonna put it in A tier, or maybe even in S tier. I do like it more than Blitzkrieg. You know what? Let's put Blitzkrieg down here. It's not that great. It's basically only a single player game, and this one is better, along with Sudden Strike 2. I do enjoy the mods. It's the same idea. You don't have buildings, you just have units, but you have these giant battles, and it's really fun. Then next up, Sudden Strike 3. The one is different from the first two. It transitioned into 3D, but not very well. A lot of people don't like it, but then again, it had really large scale battles. It can't be that bad. I guess I'll put it here somewhere. It's alright. Next up, Sudden Strike 4. Pretty similar. Actually, not that similar. They did change all the things. It's also in 3D, but it's more tactical. You have more unit abilities and things like that, I believe. I didn't really get into it, but it seems interesting. I have to finish it someday. I don't know, I guess it goes here, but I personally like these two more. Next up, Rome Total War. That's probably the best Total War game in my opinion. It's not really a classic RTS game. It's like turn-based, but then the battles are real-time. But the main selling point of Total War is the battles, really. So I guess I should classify as an RTS game. And yeah, Rome Total War was just... It's not the first Total War game, but it's just such a huge step up from the previous games. And pretty much all the games after Rome just copy this game. And the ones that don't end up kind of slacking. So yeah, this is the best one in my opinion. It's also my favorite time period. As I said with Age of Empires 1, I do like it more than the medieval period. Next up, Medieval 2. That one is also good. It's also very good. It's almost as good as Rome Total War. Maybe you can even put it up here. Not sure. Doesn't really change that much from Rome. Like, it's a great game, but it's kind of the same, just a bit better. Except the time period is worse, and there's a few mechanics that I like more in Rome. Let's just put this here, I guess, along with Shogun 2. Shogun 2 is with a different engine. It's the new modern Total War engine, which I like less. But the one thing I really like in Shogun is the, how is it called? Realm Divide. That's the one thing that makes this game really interesting. If it wasn't for that, it would be for like a bit tier. But yeah, Realm Divide, the way it works is when you're about to win the game, when you have a large portion of the map, everyone just declares war on you, and it becomes a Total War, which is like in the title, so that's what's supposed to happen in every Total War game. In Medieval and Rome, what happens is the early game is very fun and challenging, but then once you get rolling, you have like an insanely large empire and no one can stop you, and then it becomes kind of a slog. But here it's actually challenging, and that's really fun. They should do that in every Total War game, honestly. Other than that, if it wasn't for that, it's kind of not that interesting, because it's just feudal Japan, and everyone has basically the same units. There's not as much variety as in these two games. This one has so much variety, like the Romans have their guys, the Hastari, the Velites, and so on. And Carthage has elephants. The Egyptians have some janky Bronze Age Egyptian units that shouldn't exist. And then you have the Barbarians. Like every faction just plays differently. It's very fun. And these ones are kind of similar. There's also a lot of variety here. So this has the potential to go up here, but I'll just put it on top here. Next up we have Z. This is like a very old jank game where you have these robots and tanks, and they capture some points on the map. You capture territory. It's like this old DOS game. It's pretty interesting, has some interesting ideas, but you know, it probably gets boring pretty quickly. It's not as good as Warcraft 2. It has to compete with that, I believe. Next up we have Rewards Battlecry 3. This one is about the same as the first two Battlecry games. It just has more factions and more things. The way this game works is like, it's like a mix between RTS and RPG. You have a hero and you have a million different factions to choose from. It's very fun to play, it's very interesting, but it doesn't do it as well as Warcraft 3. It's not really as balanced, and it's kind of janky, and the graphics are kind of bad, honestly. But the sound design is really good. It's a really fun game. You should definitely try at least one of them if you haven't. But I don't know, it's just not well balanced, and the graphics are kind of meh. So I'll just put an 8 here. Now, next up is Warhammer Dawn of War. This is the best Dawn of War game. It goes straight up to S tier. Maybe even competing for, well, nah, it's not as good as these. So this game is basically a different take on the RTS genre. You go and capture locations on the map instead of collecting resources. And those locations provide you with resources. And you have squads. It's a squad-based RTS. It's basically the predecessor to all the other Company of Heroes and games like that. It's really good. It's my opinion as the best one. And yeah, it just goes there. I don't know how well it's balanced, and I don't know if it's played that much nowadays, but it's definitely still playable nowadays. It hasn't aged poorly. Company of Heroes, really good game, but it's basically the same as Dawn of War. Only it's in World War II. I'll put it here along with Company of Heroes 2. I don't think they're that much different. I think I like this one slightly more, not sure why. This one I believe is still played today. I think it has a pretty decent online scene still. So yeah, it's definitely a good game. But I do prefer the original type of RTS where you collect resources with like workers and things like that. This one is more squad based, which is fun, but you know, I prefer this one. Next up we have Blood and Magic, which is a very jank old game, which is kind of like Warcraft 2 with the big chunky units, the grid based RTS. But then you have the Dungeons and Dragons elements. You collect items, and you have these basal golems which collect mana and build structures and transform into units. It's really fun to play, but it's very clunky, and I can't say it's not balanced because everyone plays the same faction basically. But there are definitely some things that haven't been thought out very well. There are very cool ideas in this game. If only they kind of flesh them out a bit more, I think it'll be a great game. So unfortunately, I guess it has to go down here in the B tier. But high B with potential for A. If only they added some more content or something. Maybe different playable factions, I don't know. You could definitely do something with this game nowadays if you made a remake. Next up we have Darwinia. This game is very interesting. It's I don't know how to explain. You have these stick men basically, and these 3D I don't know, digital worlds, and you just move them around by making shapes with your mouse. It's really janky, but it's really fun to play. I do remember enjoying it. But it's definitely, it probably doesn't hold up very well nowadays. So we'll just leave it in the B tier. Now, Knights and Merchants, that's the game. I love this game. It's very jank. It's probably not... It probably hasn't aged that well. But I really like this game. It's like a Stronghold, but it's a lot slower. And there's a lot more emphasis on the city management. And the process of training units is very slow. But it's very fun, because you get to see how your village functions. You produce your weapons, you feed your guys, and you build things. So yeah, it's very fun to play. But it's mostly a single player game because it's very slow and sluggish. Definitely A tier game. And lastly you have Rise of Nations. Rise of Nations, I don't really like this game. It feels kind of, I don't know, very slow. It's like Empire Earth where you advance through the ages, but it doesn't change drastically. It's not like in Age of Empires. I don't know. To me it feels like Empire Earth, but nothing that original. So honestly I would even put it in B tier. Not a huge fan of that one. It's not a bad game. It's definitely interesting to play a couple of times. But I do think those here are better. So yeah, I guess something like that. Most of them are in A, because as I said again, I do love playing RTS games, and honestly, some of the old ones especially, I wish they would kind of explore nowadays. If you just improve the UI and the balance and just make them playable online, I think they would be great games. Like, you don't need to come up with these insane gimmicks and really complicated things for an RTS game, because it's already very complicated, even with very basic resource management and basic unit building and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely want to try maybe making a game like that in the future. Maybe something like this, very simple, but with more interesting factions and things like that. But we shall see. So yeah, those are the games I played, at least. Maybe I missed some of them. Some of them I haven't played, but there aren't too many that I haven't played that I want to play, so I think that's most of them. And yeah, maybe I'll do some of these in the future. We'll see. But for now, that's all.